Inquire all those questions you've always wanted to know. Ask Kati anything.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I am joined by my wonderful friend, psychologist and trauma specialist, Dr. Alexa Altman, and we are here to chitty chat and answer your questions as always. But how are you?
Good.
I always just check in with them, so now I get to check in with you.
Really good.
Yeah.
Happy to be here with you.
I know we have Leo. I don't think you can see him, but he's sleeping next to her. He's our little dog and he is very adorable. He always has his head tilted to the side. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's his way of being like, how you doing?
Mm-hmm. Extra cute factor.
Mm-hmm. Super cute. This will be the last video that I film in this apartment. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. I mean, I could talk about that for an hour.
I know. It's crazy, you guys. Behind the camera is just a shit ton of boxes.
It is.
And it's like I'm ready to be done, but there's still like the grief that comes along with it. I don't think I thought that I'd be bummed at all because, you know, like even you guys can't hear this, but we have like the noisiest upstairs neighbor that just moved in and it is like, it's horrible. So like all the more reason to be like, get the hell out of here.
But I feel like that happens right before a move. You get extra spicy about leaving, like before you go to college or whatever that thing is, you're like ready to go.
Yeah.
And I do think there's like, and all the noises sound even that much worse. But I think oftentimes that unexpected punch of like what I'm leaving and that you've spent so much time here.
Yeah. I mean, the channel, it's funny to think like work related, like the channel was born here. Like this is where we first shot, like the video was shot right there. We didn't have a TV up on the wall. I hung a white sheet that we had in the closet to just give us a solid background. And I filmed the video. That was like how it started, which is just really crazy to think of. But
right.
Yeah.
You birthed it here.
Yeah. It's like, interesting.
It'll always be the house that you started it.
Yeah. It's just crazy. And yeah, wrote 2 books. And did you feel that way like after bringing your boys home from the hospital and stuff and like leaving that home?
I mean, yeah, I feel like it'll always represent like the sweet time. Mm-hmm. I don't know, uncomplicated in some ways. And, you know, every hallway and every, you know, it's like has a memory.
Totally.
And, you know, to thank God you left on a high note here too, where it's like, probably imagine you'll think about this place with a certain set of like different positive experiences. Yeah. And I think that it's hard to have that when you're leaving.
Yeah.
You know?
It is. And I like the uncomplicated because that is kind of what it was here. Even now things are more complicated than they were when we first moved in. Like Sean and I weren't married yet when we first moved in here. We got married like a year later. The channel wasn't what it was like a hobby.
Right. This little thing on the side.
It was just a random thing we did every Mondays. And yeah. And we'd only lived in this apartment for like 6 months when we started it's just weird. I had like another job, like 4 other jobs.
Right. Was your full-time jobs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just even the birth of the idea to start.
That's actually Sean. Yeah.
It was Sean.
Mm-hmm. I take no ownership. I am not a camera person. I would never want to put myself in.
How did he bring it up to you?
It was because he'd gone to this event. Because Sean if you guys don't know, Sean had a production company and he has been in film production since he went to Film Academy like for college back in like, I don't know, 1998, 99 in New York. And he had gone to an event because he did a lot of corporate video, which really just means any of the videos you see on other people's websites were usually done by somebody. And it's probably Sean and his business partner, Lamar. And so they did a ton of those types of videos. And he was at this one event. And it was actually, of all people, I don't know if people know who this is, but Chalene Johnson, who does like workout videos. Mm-hmm. And she was just launching her own thing because she was still with Beachbody at the time. Anyways, this conference that she'd put on, and she talked about the power of YouTube and educating and like reaching your end consumer. Because for her, it was like selling her stuff. Like she has, I'm sure, like workout clothes probably. I don't follow her, but like workout videos, things like that at the time, like DVDs, I'm sure, or whatever. And Sean came home and he was like, you know, someone was talking about this, and like, as I was filming, I was like, Kati should do that because she specializes in eating disorders and she always says nobody understands it. And like, he's like, you should just put some stuff online, like educate people. And I'm like, as any therapist would say, no.
Therapists stay anonymous.
Exactly.
Most of the time.
It's just part of what we do.
Right.
And so as both of our husbands are very similar in this fashion, that they're very entrepreneurial and I am not.
You wouldn't know it.
I know. And I'm much more risk adverse.
I get that.
And they're both our husbands much more risk. I don't know.
Like run into the fire.
Yeah. Like
Burning
comfort. Those two can go together.
Adrenaline.
Exactly. Yeah. They just adrenaline junkies. And so anyway, so Sean brought it up and I was like, no. And then 6 months later or so, he started sending me videos from people like Jenna Marbles and people who were on YouTube, like when it first started. And he was like, people do this, like it's a thing, you know? Cause I was like, isn't that just like random, like sending videos to your family and cat videos? You have to think about what YouTube was back then in like 2010, 2011. Anyway, and that's how it began, all here. It's the end of an era.
It is. I mean, just to think about what that era really meant and looked like for the birth of so many things.
Yeah. It's crazy. And that's what I always try to, I like to be reflective. I don't know. It's just part of, I think it's me processing is really what it is. But I always try to remind myself in situations like this where we can easily see the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. You can hold this chunk of time and I can say, wow, in 10 years, a lot has changed, which obviously 10 years is a long time, but it's really not in some ways. And so when people lose sight, like friends or even patients or, you know, viewers, I'm always like, you'll be surprised how far you've come. We get so caught in the day to day that we think, oh, it's just the same, like same shit, different day.
Or get like what you said, or get caught in the next thing and in the dreaming of the future planning, or which is so easy to do, to really take the time.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
So it's interesting to think of that and like, wow, that's like a whole life change essentially. And now Texas, here we come.
Yeah.
Yay.
I mean, it's so interesting because we're just talking about just how your setting and the people you find in the new setting start to impact what you create in the new thing.
Yeah.
And so what I'm really curious about is how this change will change you.
Yeah.
You know, and of course we know it'll be a positive change because you create positivity where you go. Oh my God, that sounded so like pop psychology, but you do create positivity. But I'm just so curious in ways that are unknown, that can't be known, how it will. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's
change.
interesting when you create, and we all create things, by the way, it's not just like video creation, you know, but when in a new area and around new people, like I that's why I think I said this to you the other night when we were hanging out, like not work related, where I was like, I'm ready for this shakeup. Like we've been here for 10 years and I do feel very stagnant in some ways. Other ways not, but in a lot of, also 2020 being in this apartment for an entire year.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
stagnant.
It's like the definition of stagnation.
Yeah. Just like literally just sitting more than I've ever sat before. It's just, ugh. So I'm ready. I'm ready for a shakeup.
Shake up.
Yeah. That's exciting. So anyways, okay, we'll get into their questions. That sound good?
Let's do it.
Okay. Now we have 8. We'll see if we get through them all. If we don't, I will push them off into the next episode. Don't worry, because I know many of you notice when I've hearted them and you're like, hey, where'd that one go? I always answer them. Do not fret. And if you're new here, welcome. I ask for the questions on Sunday mornings on the YouTube channel for my podcast. Now that channel is called Opinions That Don't Matter, because that's the name of the podcast I do with my husband. And it's on the community tab at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Sundays. I ping you in the community tab asking for your questions. And don't worry if your question doesn't get a ton of thumbs ups. I also randomly pick 2 that might have no thumbs ups, 1 thumbs. It doesn't matter. I just like scroll really quickly and boom, stop. So also on my Patreon page, if you need a question answered at the $20 tier and above, you take your questions every month in a live stream. And they're usually like 3-4 hours long. And we just chitty chat up a storm.
Love that.
So much stuff. Okay.
So much stuff.
So let's get into this first question. It says, hey, Katie, for the past 6 months, I now realize that I dissociate. It can be kind of a shock to recognize that you dissociate.
Big time.
I didn't realize up until now because I had only heard of more severe types of dissociation. I blame myself for that. We should have been talking about the lighter things like maladaptive daydreaming, things like that. My therapist told me that some people who dissociate can go for long periods of time and not remember any of it. True.
Okay.
Some people can even go to foreign countries in a dissociative state. I'm assuming that's like maladaptive daydreaming, like we're going there in our mind.
Oh.
Sounds like.
Okay.
He said that some people feel like they're outside of themselves. Yeah. Deep personalization. And can see themselves as if they're a different person. I feel numb quite a lot of the time, and I worry that I won't get that feeling back. You will, don't worry.
I like that you said back. That means she has had that before.
So that's good because we can tap into that and
Tap
we
into
remember.
that. Yeah.
Okay. My therapist said this is a form of dissociation. When I was in a psychology or psychotherapy appointment, I could hear my therapist talking, but it was like his words were more noise. And it was like I couldn't understand it. Again, that depersonalization.
Wah, wah.
That mom at the and Peanuts. He wasn't telling me anything complex, so it wasn't a case of me not understanding him. Can you please give us some examples of dissociation that aren't as severe? I've spent my whole life not realizing I dissociate. I only knew about the severe way that people do it. Thank you for all your help. Your videos have helped a lot. Of course. Very welcome. I'm glad it was helpful. So my first inkling is like, I talk about dissociation on a spectrum, and it sounds like they've only heard of like, and we talked about this a little bit before because I didn't want to just spring these on her, is dissociative fugues.
Right.
So do you feel comfortable explaining to people what those are?
Well, just that idea of dissociation as a defensive protective response. It's like the intelligence not to be afraid. It's really the intelligence of your nervous system. I think it's important to say that. It's life preserving. It's like really helps. It's like, turning off the fuse box when the house is ready to explode into fire, right? We need to be able to shut it down.
I love that. I always call it like our brain pulling the ripcord, like it's jumping out of the plane. It's like, and so it's a parachute.
Love it. It is a parachute, right?
I got to pull away from this for a bit and just float.
Right. So that fugue state, so we think of, the idea of multiple personalities. People think about that, where there's whole states or ego states that are completely cut off from other states, which means you could have another personality. This is very extreme, by the way, and usually only occurs with people who've had severe early trauma, where you have whole personalities that aren't aware of other parts and personalities.
Yeah, it's almost like a complete switch out. Hence why it used to be called multiple personality disorders. Before it was, dissociative identity
disorder.
They always change the names, and it's fine.
Yes.
But that it's even, I remember reading in school, and they had those videos that they taught us with. And there was one woman who in one state or one personality would wear glasses, and in another she wouldn't. And I was like, that is like mind blowing to me.
Right.
And one would smoke a cigarette and the other hated cigarettes. Like,
right.
It's crazy.
So if we think about it, I worked with somebody once where there was a 16-year-old boy state who talked and walked like a teenager. And if you think about it, we all have teenage parts inside of us.
100%.
Right?
I have a toddler. She tantrums.
I have a 6-year-old that's not pretty when she comes out to make dinner. And so we think about that, but we know, or maybe we don't really know these other parts are coming out, but they're more integrated, meaning they're still part of the whole of our personality. So that's what we think of, like these more extreme forms of dissociation where there's less awareness that one part is out. And there is a part that could go on vacation and function in the world in that way. But I think about that continuum. More often what you see in dissociation is numbing.
Yeah.
Is you see foggy, forgetful. Sometimes it can look like forgetfulness, exhaustion, even though a person, it could actually sometimes look like depression.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there is something to like that lack of concentration, the difficulty focusing, because one of the like what I would, and I don't like to say like minor, major, because it's all dissociation, but like in a not as long lasting or maybe as severe as some, you could like not know how you got to work and got home. Like you might have that little chunk, that dissociative state that was like, oh, because I know that when our brain pulls a ripcord or when it unhooks a fuse box, it's doing it protectively, and therefore part of our brain isn't on board, so we don't actually form memories.
Right.
And I don't know exactly why. Like I read a bunch of stuff for my book that's coming out about, and it was, some of it was way over my head and some of it was fine, but a lot of it was about like where they think trauma memories are formed, and if we are dissociated, like are we able to form memories? Some people believe yes, some people believe no, some people believe they're just like scattered, almost like trauma memories are in general, where they don't have beginning, middle, and end. Yeah, I don't know.
So I think it's also just as far as the alarming to think, oh my God, I dissociate. This isn't on. This, I I think that can be very scary. That's what I kind of was interpreting in the question. Like, what does this mean? How do I get it back? And the thing I would say about the back is the fact that you've been embodied at some point in life where you remember feeling things. That would probably be where I would start, is slowly into sensations of a memory of a time, particularly probably where you felt safe or connected or cared for, is a good way back in. Because, the minute we get back into the body, what's waiting for us, I don't want to sound like a scary movie, but what's waiting for us, that's not a good, what's here or there is what sent us out in the first place. So we got to go in slowly. And, the other thing that just occurred to me is people that tend to dissociate more, sometimes you'll see a lot of accidents, falls, car accidents, because they're not orienting to the environment. And so it's like, you might not know that that's what's going on. It's like, oh, or I'm clumsy.
I stumble a lot.
So, and that would be, as a patient or as a clinician, either one, just, kind of be on the lookout for.
That's interesting.
Experience.
Yeah, because I think that's also, again, kind of to this person's question, like some examples could be that. I mean, we all have blips where we space out, quote unquote, space out, and don't know, like don't remember, like I'll be in the shower deep in thought and I'll be like, did I wash my hair?
Right.
I don't remember.
Right. Did I lock the car? Did I lock the door?
You think about all sorts and you don't remember. Like just this morning, Sean and I were trying to recycle paint and tires because we're moving. So we have all sorts of random crap. And he was like, I can't find my wallet. And I was like, well, think back to when you last had it. It wasn't there. He was like, I don't know. And then, of course, as not to say that men can't find things, but as as the woman of the house, I found it right away.
But I think it's a really good example, because during stressful life events, like when there's a lot going on, I think that is when we tend to dissociate a bit more. It's just too much information going on in there. And then I think about in therapy where there's a lot of emotional arousal and activation. She was saying with her therapist, the wah, wah, wah.
Yeah.
I was like, sometimes if you can notice the dissociation happening, which already is huge progress, right? Like, oh wait, I'm not hearing you right now. You could name that in the session with the therapist, like, oh, I think something's happening right now. Maybe you don't even know what's happening, but something's happening. What's really cool about that is you noticing that that's happening is presence. So even if you're dissociated, the fact that you're saying it and maybe naming it to the other person, that is the beginning of a different kind of awareness. And so we might say there's a part of you that's dissociated, but there's a part of you that's not.
Because there's a part of you is aware, and that awareness is huge. Like you can work months and months and months to try to get someone to have awareness of when it's happening.
That's right.
And I feel like with anything in therapy, just having someone know is key, because then we can track back to like before if they remember.
That's right.
And then we can try to, again, we can enable resources. We can use, there's even like, someone was just telling me, a member of our community, that like bergamot, like pulls her, like that smell. And I've used peppermint in my office sometimes, or orange, like stronger scents. But fidget toys,
noticing colors in the room. So you could start orienting and then notice the difference. Like what's really cool when you start to notice dissociation and then noticing presence and being able to feel that shift, and be able to feel that out in the world, it's very powerful. Yeah,
because a lot of times it's just that awareness that is so key to the healing, and so often in life we're just kind of like not aware, like blindly, just like going through our life. So I think the fact that you already have this awareness is key. I think that was Leo. Did he make a little noise?
My little white poodle.
But yeah, hopefully that helps you better understand what dissociation can look like in cases that aren't, like complete dissociative fugues or lasting. I do want to normalize too that some people have told me over the years that they'll be like huge chunks, if not their whole life, where they feel like they've just been in and out and they're not really sure. And so that's why I've talked about in the past how having huge chunks of memory loss is indicative of something happening, but it's not so important that we know what happened during that time. It's kind of tracking back to the last time we remember, like, I'll have even friends, but also patients will be like, I don't remember anything from like, I don't know, like third grade to middle school, well, these huge swaths of time that we're like, I can't really account for that. And that's, again, dissociation most likely. caused by something traumatic would be my, hypothesis.
Yeah, I think it's a good starting hypothesis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just be curious then.
Right. Not as, I think, alarm. That's, I think, the bigger picture here of like, let's not create alarm, just the curiosity.
Yeah. No judgment. Just be curious.
Be curious.
Okay. Let's move on to question number 2. Okay. Question number 2 says, "Hi, Katie. I really struggle with boundaries. Join the club. I recently went to my teacher to talk about mental health struggles, and she helped me so much." That's great. It's a great resource. She even shared stories about her and her experience. Is this crossing a boundary? Should I not do this again? How do I know when I'm crossing boundaries? Thank you so much. This is a good question. And boundaries are something that I feel like we're always all trying to get better at. The thing that I do think is super cool about our bodies and our nervous system is it tells us when someone has crossed our boundaries. We won't know if we've crossed someone else's, but that, for instance, and I've used this example before, back before COVID, when we would be in a crowded restaurant waiting for a table or something, and someone, usually a guy, but not always, would come behind you and put their hand on your back. But I can see Sean and I know it's not him. I have like a visceral, like, who are you? I don't like that. It's crossing a boundary, a physical boundary. I didn't say you can touch me. I don't know you. That makes me uncomfortable, right? That sensation, we have that emotionally too. When we find ourselves avoiding people, when we feel like our buttons are pushed by something's happened where there's this emotional boundary that's been crossed, and it's identifying that for ourselves. That's like, again, like back to the first question, that identification or that awareness is like the first step as we learn more. Be curious,
I really appreciate that level of like tracking of body and awareness. And then my question for the person who wrote the question is, why are you asking? What was uncomfortable about the teacher giving you that much information? Because it maybe was more than typically you'd find in that role. And is there concern that it's going to get more, or was there something uncomfortable about what was given? So I think I'd want to know if, did you feel like the information that was provided was inappropriate? Did you feel like there was an overshare? Did you feel pressure? Was there something that lingered after for you? Because on paper, I read that and I was like, well, it sounds pretty good. Actually, sounds like a pretty awesome, supportive teacher. But what is the concern next? Like, I think that kind of intimacy, maybe with the teacher, of not knowing or understanding the boundaries of that, when a teacher kind of lets you in a different way, or a person lets you in a different way.
Totally. And there could be some discomfort. And it could come from a lot of different places. It could just be different, and different is uncomfortable. Or it could even be indicative of something else that's happened. Like maybe we are a parentified child and our parent always told us about their relationships and things that shouldn't be shared with children. And so having another adult tell us about their experiences is like triggering. Again, going back to like being curious and not judgmental, I'd be curious about that. Like, was that uncomfortable for you or not? Was it just, hey, I felt like maybe they shared too much and I'm wondering if I pushed for that? Like, is it...
That's a good question.
Is it a people-pleasing thing or is it a boundary thing?
Right. Because I think if going into that level of inquiry, you could really understand what's behind the question and what might be behind some of your feelings about it.
Exactly. And I don't think, to answer the question directly, like, is this crossing a boundary? It's possible, but we don't really know. To me, reading it, same as Alexa, I'm like, this sounds wonderful. Great support, a great teacher who's really empathizing with you. That's what sharing personal experience. And therapists do it too. It's just not as frequent because it's your session, not ours. And the only reason we would share something is because we think it would help you.
Right. It's actually a really good point. In therapy, I think that's similar if you feel like your therapist is oversharing, and how you know the difference when they're sharing that supports where you are in a way that maybe you feel joined or understood, or you feel like you have to take care of them because they're sharing so much. So that's when I think the boundary is crossed, when you no longer feel like they're in service of you, but in service of themselves in some way.
That's a great indicator. I don't know if I've ever thought about that, but you are right. Because as a recovering people pleaser, my therapist has never done this to me, but that I would be so quick to jump into that role, and it would be super unhealthy. It'd be like feeding into old patterns that I'm trying to prevent from continuing.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Interesting. So so paying attention to that. But number one, I'm really glad you reached out to your teacher. Teachers are great resources, especially if they're supportive and understanding, which this one sounded like, they were. Should you not do this again? The only reason I would say to not would be if there is some discomfort, like lingering, if there's something about that engagement or that conversation that bothered you, and we need to work on that in therapy. Does that make sense? Do you agree?
I do. And I think, again, the question would be if it lingered and then you discovering why it lingered.
And it was something like, not big, not necessarily big, but just something upsetting that we needed to try to process or figure out. And then just to answer finally, how do I know when I'm crossing boundaries? Again, you'll only know for two reasons. You'll know because it's your boundary and you feel it, which everybody experiences them differently. Like I talked about the physical boundary of someone putting their hand on you and it's not consensual and you don't know who that person is. You're like, ugh, you don't like it. Or the emotional, where you feel like we all know when someone overshares and we don't really know them that well. If that emotional connection isn't reciprocated with us, we can feel like, wow, that's too much, like overwhelmed. We can feel exhausted after engagement with them because that's like an emotional vampire, someone who, again, we're the caretaker. They like, oh, I'm a martyr, like, oh, rescue me. That can be exhausting. We can find ourselves avoiding contact in general with people. We can find ourselves like prickly around them. Like, I'm not really an easy to anger person, but if someone does that in me, something's up. Like it's an indicator of something, right? Could be a boundary, something to look into. And again, these are not hard and fast. These are just like ideas to get you thinking so that you can recognize it in yourself. Because for me, it's the exhaustion. I'll feel that first, and the avoidance. And
so what does your exhaustion feel like? How do you know? Like what's your experience when you're like, I really get that. That's how it feels. That's I
guess like after spending time with that person for, let's say even just more than an hour, like more than just like a casual contact, I guess, that I like need alone time. Like I don't want to talk to Sean. I don't want to call my mom on the way home, or you know what I mean? I'm just like, I just have to go inside and like recharge. And I've noticed that with friends I'm no longer friends with because of that reason, because part of my work in therapy was to recognize when that's happening and to set up boundaries. And say, like, to change the subject to something about me or another benign situation. And I found that they could never do that. It was like always pull tractor beam back. And so I was always exhausted. And so then the second stage of me realizing was me avoiding their phone calls, texts, not wanting to see them, just like putting it off because I knew it was going to be so taxing. And then my therapist saying like, has there ever been a time that you felt cared for or nurtured by them? And this reciprocation, because we all go through tough times, right? We might need to lean on a friend for more support during a tough time. But I couldn't recall one. And she was like, you might want to consider if that's worthwhile for you, And it wasn't. Spoilers. Jump forward. 6 months of me.
But I think that like what you're saying, the only way through that is through that inquiry and then trying things out.
Yeah.
And then discovering, and I think what you named is how do I know when I'm crossing a boundary? It's really your boundary.
Yeah.
And you can't know anybody else's boundary.
The only way you'll know is if they tell you.
Yeah.
But people are not very good communicators.
No one gets that skill. I feel like it should be a course in high school.
It should be. How do you tell people proper ways to treat and not treat you?
Yeah.
How do we communicate that healthfully?
Yeah.
Because
skillfully.
Yeah.
I feel like it is a skill, and people are well-meaning most of the time. I really do believe that. They're and parents, for the most part, just unskilled, or inexperienced in that way. So, yeah, I do feel like the question, though, has me thinking that you're already asking the right question.
Yes.
And that you're looking up the right things and that you can experiment with yourself, track how you feel. I love what your therapist did, which was give you examples of like, okay, what are the needs I'm having met? Can I try things out and see? And I think it's only through that experimentation. You can't do it in your head. You really need to be
try
in the field.
Yeah. And I think that's why like boundaries are such a tricky thing. and why it took me so much work in therapy to like try things out, start noticing. But again, only if they tell you, will you know someone else's, because it's not your responsibility. Again, like as a, recovering people pleaser, you don't have to read everyone's every move and emotion to try to guess where that is. That's not your job. It's other people's jobs to communicate. And people might not communicate boundaries per se, but they will communicate upsets, or they will communicate expectations, hopefully. And those are all things that we can ask for, we can do ourselves, we can practice so that someone feels free to do the same back, like to reciprocate. And that's really it. Because as my therapist would say, you can only clean your side of the street. You can't clean the whole street. You'll be exhausted.
It'll get all messied up again.
It does, because they don't want it clean.
No, I mean, it's great when you're with somebody that's interested in doing that too.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, then the relationships develop and grow into like something more beautiful.
Flourish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But hopefully that helps. I know boundaries are so complicated.
Oh, so complicated.
And it's something that I feel like even as someone who's acutely aware, I still struggle.
Yeah.
And I'll find myself in relationships where I'm like, well, this isn't beneficial.
Yeah. And sometimes I think you can't know for a while. So like even in this example with the teacher, I feel like sometimes it's like it takes time to really feel out and have multiple interactions before. So also don't be too hard on yourself if you discover that boundary was crossed. That's part of the learning.
Exactly. Yeah. And in one instance, it does take, it's more than one instance to like figure it out.
It takes people some time to show you who they are.
True. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to question number 3. We good?
Let's do it.
Okay. It says, hi, Katie. Do you think it's possible for our struggles, for example, anxiety, depression, lack of self-worth, to ever go away completely? I feel like there are some things, my anxiety, for example, that I've been working on for years, and I wonder if I'll always have to work as hard to keep it in check. I love this question.
I get this one a lot.
Yeah, with everything.
Yeah.
Eating disorder, recovery, self-injury, addiction, trauma. Am I going to feel like this forever? Because I think when we're in it, especially this person's talking about anxiety, but especially for depression, when you're in it, it takes away all hope, all future planning, all anything. And so I think sometimes it can feel like there's no, like we're just like looking around the dark and there's like no way out, And so it can feel like I'm stuck like this forever. But
yeah, and it's like who I am.
yes. And like that like not personification, but like taking that on as an identity. I think is one part, like it's very dangerous, but it's also very common.
Right.
Right.
I am my depression versus I feel depressed.
Totally.
I am my anxiety. Yeah.
I think that's why we always talk about like externalization, especially when it comes to eating disorders, like giving it a name, It can even just be a name like Dickwad. It doesn't have to be a real name. Could be anything.
Larry.
Yeah. Steve. Steve's a turd.
Yeah.
Just kidding. But the way I like to describe like recovery, because I feel like that's kind of what we're talking about here, is just our mental health is just like our physical health. And if I caught the flu, let's say, or strep throat, because I had that a ton as a kid before my tonsils were removed, thank God. Them quote unquote curing, technically my strep throat, I had no symptoms anymore, but it could come back if I didn't sleep well or didn't drink enough water, didn't take care of myself, right? My immune system gets depressed, pun intended, I guess. It runs down, I get run down and I get sick. And I think of these things like anxiety, depression, even trauma symptoms. Yeah. If, again, going back to conversations I've had in the past with you guys about resilience, like when our level of resilience starts to get slimmer and slimmer, because maybe like I'm moving, right? So maybe you're not sleeping as well. Maybe you're not drinking enough water, eating properly. Maybe I'm not doing my like act ahead or cope ahead skills like journaling or going for walks or connecting with people who make me feel good. If I'm not doing all that stuff, I can become more and more vulnerable to having other things come up. And so going back to my strep throat analogy, I could get to a point where I don't have any symptoms, but if I don't take care of myself, it comes back. And I think the same is with mental health. Like you can treat your anxiety, and I don't think you'll have to work as hard to keep it in check. It'll get easier, more maintenance, but you're still going to have to do some things.
I agree. I cannot tell you how often I get this question. So I think it's solid in that sense. Like, I think it's a vulnerability. And like any vulnerability, it will express itself when you're vulnerable. And there's something about that can be like wreak havoc on you in the sense of like, okay, so this is something I'm going to be working with. The way I think about it is like square footage in brain. Like when you're in your symptom, it's at the front of your brain and it's taking up a lot of square footage. And then as you recover, it's kind of lives somewhere back here. It doesn't take up as much space. Life takes up more space. And maybe there's like echoes of it. That's kind of how I understand some of these, diagnoses or just expressions of parts of us, is that they can be whispers or they can be like the loudest voice in the room.
Yes.
So I can speak to my own personal journey. I think when I'm in a good spot, those things are whispers and I don't believe what they say. They're like, oh, there she is, Ed, whatever I want to call it, right?
Yeah.
There she is again. And then she recedes, Yeah. But at those times, those stressful life times where the support, knowing like, okay, this is going to be the expression of my distress, might come through in that way.
Yeah, no, I love that. One of my friends, Lindsay Sterling, who is also a YouTube creator, and she's been on the channel, she describes her eating disorder voice like it puts on a different dress and a wig and it tries to come back. And she's like, at first you think, oh, you're somebody different. She's like, I know who you are.
Right.
Gets up close and you're like,
right. She can take on many forms.
Yes.
Sneaky and sly.
Yeah. And I think it does that sometimes because I know that I'm pretty good with having boundaries and saying no when I need to now, more than I used to be. But in our times of stress and duress, I will make flippant decisions and double book. And then I'll be like, why am I doing this? Like you can do these old behaviors out of habit. And not because, and then also I want you to know that doesn't mean you're back at square one.
No.
You still have your tools and things.
Wait, I think that actually is what's so distressing when there's a recurrence or there's, maybe a flare in a certain symptom is it feels like I'm not making progress. When I can think about this, like this last year in the pandemic, most people in my life were in their most primitive, earliest survival styles, which can look like depression, look like anxiety. It's like, of course we're going to retreat to our earliest things, and we could look at it in a number of ways. I like to think about it when the symptoms resurface, it's another opportunity for deeper states of recovery. It's like, okay, all the, stuff is out of the closet again. We get to go work it and clean it up. And I mean, I think it can be incredibly frustrating if there was a belief that I actually am exactly where I was before, because we bring every time symptoms resurface a new perspective, a new way to work, different people around us. And I feel like it's just a call for deeper recovery.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah. So yeah, I think just to finally answer your question in very succinct, I do this all the time. Don't worry. It's not just you. It's me.
Because we could talk for hours.
We could. We easily could.
Okay.
So go away completely. Yes. However, if we don't take care of ourselves, the whispers can turn back into shouts. And it can be, again, like to Alexa's point, it can take up more space. Like we can get it to where it feels like it's just this little dot and we're like kind of aware of it. So it's kind of there, but not really. And then, but if we don't take care of ourselves, it can come back. And then you said, like, I wonder if I'll always have to work as hard to keep it in check. No, you will not. I feel like it's like the first time you go to Pilates and you're like, I didn't realize I had these muscles. This is so hard. And you're in that stage where you're me shaking on one of those, the transformer thing where you're like, oh my God, I can't even do this. But then if I had gone every day for months, those muscles are built up. And so your muscles of knowing how to manage the anxiety will be built up. You'll have tools at the ready that are like almost instinctual. And it'll be much more laborious.
Some skill.
Yeah.
I remember when I started meditating, the frustration and the exhaustion of having to sit and focus on my breath, it just felt like this was an unteachable skill for me to learn.
Yeah, it's just not for me.
It's just, that's basically what I came to. And then the discovery, that you sit long enough and your mind does quiet down and you actually can sit still. I think of anxiety a little bit like that too, in the sense of like skillfully being able to sit and know how to sit still in the face of that anxiety and having a way to feel less encumbered by all of those voices.
Or less reactive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Okay, let's move on to question number 4.
Okay.
It says, I am trying to work on recalling events surrounding a traumatic situation to be able to make a statement to the police and assist with other cases that may be linked to my situation. There are pivotal parts that I can't recall, at which is so frustrating. I get it. So to help, I tried watching triggering material. Watching triggering materials like documentaries, crime shows along the same topic to help spark recall, or to at least give me scenarios to consider. It actually helped in a few different ways, despite it making me feel so unsafe. That's what I was worried about. So raw emotionally and wanting to disappear. From a therapist's point of view, am I doing more harm than good? Do you have any ideas that I could try to help recall, that I could do to try to help recall the truth of the trauma when it's necessary for police work? There is a part of me that doesn't care that I'm re-traumatizing myself because of the lack of self-worth. How do I find a good balance in all of that? Okay, this is a great question. And first of all, I just want to say our legal system sucks. And why? I mean, I've heard from so many of you, and I've dealt with a few patients over the years having to do, it's like you have to brief everybody, and then you have to say it again and again and again and again. Like, it's like they didn't have any therapeutic touch involved in any of the process.
Or training.
At all. It's so re-traumatizing. Yeah. So, okay, so what do you think?
I have a lot to say.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited about it. What do you...
So first, I just want to say I'm so sorry that you had to go through the first experience, but then kind of go through the police proceeding aspect of it. It's like the first number one no actually in any trauma therapy is you don't tell the whole story and you don't keep telling the whole story, because every time you tell the story, go through the story, your nervous system goes through it again and again and again. And it's not necessarily seeking resolution when it goes through it again.
Because there's no resources or no soothing or no calming, right?
Right. Or support or place in which, or vehicle in which to actually reprocess it.
Yeah, a therapeutic vehicle.
Yeah. You're kind of just going through it alone again. So, I would say as much as it feels like you really want to help the police and move the case going forward, I hear that really wanting to be of service and make it maybe meaningful in that way, what you went through. That I don't know if that's true, but that's what it felt like when I read it. But what I might say is I actually feel like working with the therapist, not necessarily to get the memories back. Sometimes they don't come back. And that's just the reality of the way we consolidate memory. We're just not perfect recorders. And that's they're very typical. And often when parts of memories do come back, they're not always accurate. They're part of, I'm not saying we don't believe our memories. It's just part of our experience and processing. So I would pause on that of trying to get to the memory. You might not like that response.
No, it's
and
fair,
work with
though.
the trained and work with a trained professional so that you can actually address the traumatic experience.
Yeah, and feel better.
Yeah, feel better.
Yeah, because, and I mean, I agree with everything you said, because I think what you're doing, like, the question, am I doing more harm than good? And I mean, it's hard to say, like, are you doing more harm than good necessarily? But I would say yes for you. Like, again, I know the good that you think you're doing is to help the police. And I understand, like, I want every dirtbag locked up too. And I like to spit on them personally. So I understand, like, the want to do. But again,
it's justice.
Yeah, everybody wants justice, right? Something was done to me that was harmful. And I wish I could remember so you could get that dickwad off the street.
Yeah.
Because who knows if they'll do it to someone else. But I also want you to know that's not your responsibility. Something happened to you that was out of your control, and you have the potential to assist if you can. But because those memories aren't here right now, I feel like in a way it's almost like we're fighting against ourselves. It's like we're pushing too hard to try to recall, and it might be pushing it deeper if it exists at all.
If it exists, yeah.
Sometimes it's like when we want something so bad, it makes it harder to get. Do you know what I mean? It's like the best way I can describe it is like something fell into a ball pit, and as you reach to get it, it falls below deeper and deeper, and then you reach again and it falls to the lower level, and before you know it, you're completely in the ball pit trying to push them away, and they only fall more where, it's like it's an effort and futility. You can't really dig it out that way.
Right. You're not actually helping recall the memory and or support your nervous system.
Yeah, because as you do this forceful recall attempt, which I understand, but it's again, like to Alexa's point, it's your nervous system is heightened again, and we're like re-traumatized again. And so it's not the only way to attempt healthfully to recall this would be to try to work with a professional so that you could find a way to soothe your system and help you feel safe enough and held enough to just start talking about it a little bit.
And in that case, sometimes those missing pieces do come back, but not through efforting. It really comes back as a part of your healing.
Yeah. And I think and I know that sucks. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
it totally sucks. And again, I wish police, like, I understand the need for statements because otherwise people could just go around claiming anybody did anything. But again, that's something you have the possibility to do usually for many years. If you decide that that's what's best for you. We'd all like to get the dirtbags off the street, but that's not your responsibility. I would encourage you, every time that thought comes in your head, we're like, well, I should. I want you to shut it down and say, Katie said, stop shitting on yourself. You're shitting all over it. And you don't have to do. You shouldn't do anything. What you actually need to do is to help yourself and get some support. And finding an actual trained professional who understands trauma, not someone who just says that they do, so that someone does it properly and doesn't push you too hard, too fast. You know, and kind of helps you soothe a little. Like, I bet you could probably benefit from a nice full body shake today. What do you think? Okay, I just want to make sure we answered all of your questions. So, am I doing more harm than good? I think so. Do you have ideas that could try to help recall the truth? Working with someone slowly, unfortunately. There's no shortcut.
There's no
I wish there was. If there was, we would tell you exactly how to get there. But there's just like this, one highway, and it's a windy one, and I'm sorry. There's part of me that doesn't care that I'm re-traumatizing myself because of lack of self-worth. Unfortunately, trauma can do that to us too.
I think trauma, we could interchange trauma and shame, because when we're traumatized, it elicits shame states. On some level, we feel that we were unworthy or somehow deserving of what happened to us. That's very
Something's
common.
wrong with us to cause it.
Right. Or I did something, or I'm getting punished. So then we kind of want to continue to punish ourselves. So I just want to, I think, speak to that, I was like, okay, that's a side effect of trauma. And we can go with that side effect of trauma and continue to punish ourselves, becoming further traumatized, or decide to take contrary action. Contrary action, even though you don't feel like it, contrary action is action toward your own self-care. And so I think about that. I was like, even if it doesn't go along with your belief, it's actually okay.
Yeah. And that's, we do that in DBT all the time, opposite action, where when we want to push people away and we want to react, maybe instead we reach out to a support and we do something soothing. And it doesn't feel good at when you first start. And it's really hard. Like it's a power of the wills. But I think even in doing the contrary action or opposite action, you realize just how mentally strong you are and how capable you are of actually just deciding what you want. And again, I just getting in to see a professional will just be key. Because in the final part says, how do you find good balance and all of that? You don't. And you're not expected to. I think it's finding supports to help us remember what balance feels like, Right.
This doesn't sound like a job to be done on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in that. I think we all need support. Like, I need support all the time anyway, but especially when we have something traumatic happen, we need even more. And that's just part of the human condition.
Yeah, we were just built that way.
Yeah, we need that connection,
We do. We really do.
It's soothing to our system.
It is. As you just can't change our hardwiring, really.
And it is just the way that it is, unfortunately. But there are good people out there, so find someone that really gets you, and we'll start there. Okay, let's move on to question number 5. And that question says, hi, Katie, I keep downplaying my symptoms or even contemplating canceling my therapy sessions sometimes. You wouldn't. I'm just kidding. I'm not quite sure why I'm doing this. It's very common. Often this happens in moments when I'm actually quite depressed and overwhelmed and therefore would really benefit from therapy. Very normal. I'm having suicidal thoughts in one moment and then downplaying it in the next because obviously everything is fine. How can I keep perspective and take my feelings seriously?
Oh, you start with this one.
This is so common. A lot of it has to do with and not to say that this is all like in our upbringing, but a lot of it has to do with the way that we were spoken to about our emotions. So it's too often, and hopefully this doesn't happen as much anymore, but too often we're told as kids, like, brush it off, step up, stop crying. Boys don't cry, get up, do this. You're overreacting, get in the car and shut up. Like, parents say things to kids like that. They get frustrated. I understand. I don't have kids. I don't know the sleep deprivation personally, but messages like that are received repeatedly over time, I believe, tell us deep down that we can't trust how we feel, or that we're not, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It's kind of like we're not worthy of support in some way. And so we can find ourselves in adulthood putting other people first. It's a people pleasing thing, kind of, but putting up other people first, never asking for help, downplaying what's really upsetting to us, and we're almost like re-injuring ourselves with the same thing that injured us to begin with. And I think it's very common for a lot of us because, people always say parents did the best they could. And I always like to say parents did the best they could with what they knew, and they might not have known anything. So we just do what we can with what we got. And unfortunately, that leaves these kinds of ripple effects, I think. So there's that component. And then my second thought is, because these are just hypotheses. Like, it's a funny thing, because if you're a therapist in session, you'd like go down a little road to see if there's anything there. Like,
we usually don't throw out a theory.
No, but we just ask a couple questions.
An inquiry.
And see if there's any meat on the bone there.
Right.
Like, did they really?
You don't want to nibble too early.
No, we just let it. And then the other thought would be, and this would be happening either way, but I'd really do some thought tracking. I think that's really helpful to try to see and understand what your invalidating personal comments are. Because I think in your head a lot, you're telling yourself, like, suck it up, buttercup, you're fine. This isn't that big of a deal, or something. And I'd like to know what those messages are. And then we could track where they came from.
Yeah. I mean, you hit so many points here, but, if we think about that as an emotional survival style, the minimizing, and maybe it was your parents' survival emotional style too. They minimized how they dealt with things. Maybe they didn't have other forms of coping. So this would be my hypothesis, maybe minimized yours. So if you're not minimizing, then maybe you don't have the felt experience of what it's like to sit in distress with another human being. That might feel really overwhelming because it was new or different. You never had that. And so maybe there isn't that we call affect tolerance and emotional tolerance yet. So when you have real big states, the bigger the state is, maybe the bigger the need to do that, to manage it and control it. And that way it's very similar to what Katie said. And this is the beautiful thing about therapy, is even if you can't express how you feel, you might express that observation. Like, I notice I do this thing. Because once it's named between you and the therapist, it's something that you guys get to track together. And that's the great thing. Maybe you don't want to say how you're really feeling, but you can say, here's what I'm doing with what I'm feeling. That process kind of observation gives the therapist an idea of, oh, that's a whole good point, that like a place to connect and get some support around. And, I guess by doing that though, you are willing to sit in the fire a little bit more with the person. And because you wrote the question makes me think you are willing to, and you want to, because you do want more recovery. You want to feel better. And if you say that to a therapist, they will have heard that before. It's not going to upset or startle them. You've done nothing wrong. They have done nothing. This is really normal stuff.
Yeah. And also, I think it will give some context if you do try to cancel therapy in the future, because I've had so many patients do that, where they're like, they'll start showing up a little bit late, or it's just part of the resistance/defense mechanisms that are there for a reason. And the funny thing about therapy is that even if you think what you're doing is quote unquote bad, it's actually really helpful for us to know about it and to see it, because that tells us something, right? Like, if I'm getting this kind of reaction from you, what are we talking about? What's happening? What's triggering it? If I can, it makes me more curious about it. And then we can hopefully together come to some kind of answer or partial answer.
So I feel like we're in the subject now of transference and countertransference. So what is displayed and what is like the meat of therapy, not all therapies, but a lot of therapies, is that you're doing this behavior, right? You're kind of minimizing. I was like, so you're playing out with a therapist what you do inside of yourself, right? And maybe what you do outside of the room, or maybe what was done to you. All of that is like the juiciest material in therapy. It's the stuff that's not talked about, but felt or experienced between you and the therapist, or you inside of yourself. That's actually means you're probably moving into a different stage of therapy. You're not in the beginning stage anymore, because all that stuff comes out when you actually get comfortable with a person.
Because then you start acting out of old patterns usually.
So we're saying, bravo, this is good news. And it is really like, that's the work of your therapy right now.
Totally. And I think that's the cool thing about therapy, because some people will be like, but I'm not even talking about the stuff that I came in for. And I'm like, you are, though. It's complicated, right? Because the things that come up are just as important as the quote unquote reason that we came in.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Sometimes I had a mentor say to me, you can like listen to the song, but you really need to be able to hear the music, and like you can't just listen to the words. You have to hear all of it. And sometimes people come in, they really want to tell you the story. Let's just get to
the lyrics.
It's just the lyrics. You have to be able to hear the music underneath. So I think you're in the music underneath the lyric. And I think the other thing is it's probably safe to assume, I know it's true, but most of what's revealed inside of a person, most therapists have heard before.
Yeah, it's true.
There's not much, I don't want to say like, there's not much I haven't heard. I'm not saying it like that. I'm saying humans are not that different in the sense of what's deep inside is pretty universal.
And our adaptive abilities are pretty much the same. There's like certain ways that it can go. I'm sure, as soon as you say like, it's been a long time since I've ever been shocked by anything, that something will come that's shocking, but people aren't that shocking. It's really just not, I don't want to say like normal human behavior, but like we do the best we can with what we got. We're adaptive. We are emotional creatures. We need community and
sensitive.
Yeah. And all of us come out of it with our own unique flavors of things, but they follow these patterns. And I feel like the act of being a therapist is really just like a pattern finder.
Oh yeah. That's true. It's so true.
And I'm always looking for, even in my real life, that's one thing I can't quite turn off is patterns.
Yeah.
Which is why sometimes I'll tell like friends of friends prior to like me not being friends with someone, I'll be like, I don't think it's going to work because, they've been doing this and it's just, and they're like, oh yeah, I forgot they did that back then. I'm like, yeah, they did that. And then this and it all looks the same. And like, I can't handle it anymore.
Right. It's like a chessboard. You kind of know. I mean, you have to be open to unexpected, but yeah, I guess there's that. And this pattern, this is a great pattern to notice.
Yeah.
It really is.
And to just, honestly, if you feel able to let your therapist know you're doing this, say, I've noticed this thing where I just contemplate canceling therapy, and I know I'm saying I'm not feeling as bad as I am. I don't know why I'm doing this. And if you have to read it off of paper that you wrote and just get it out, like blah, 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 like no emotion, like it's fine.
I love that.
Just to put it into the room, because I think that then the work can begin on it.
Can I say one more thing about it? If you went in, let's just suppose for a second that you went in and you didn't minimize it. Can you imagine standing in the truth of how bad you feel with a real witness that can see it? There's something about it being confirmed, observed, validated, that makes it real. And so I think there might be a part of you that's afraid of that too. Like, we kind of deny sometimes our suffering because it's overwhelming, right? So to have somebody see it, and then you see their face, you see them see it, it's like, okay, this is really happening.
Yeah.
And that's the first step is acknowledging that something's really happening. So I just further encourage you in that direction.
Yeah, no, that's great. And that is true. That's why I've always told you guys to write things down, just read it off, because sometimes we get caught up saying the words aloud. Like, oh, if I put this out there, it's real. And then if I say this word, like even calling it what it's called can be overwhelming, especially for trauma. Like if you've, been assaulted, calling it an assault, or using the R word. If we've been sexually assaulted, like those things can be very overwhelming. And so even my eating disorder patients, calling it an eating disorder can be overwhelming and difficult, and that admitting it's real. And even personally, I'd say in my own therapy too, like to your point, like saying it out loud to someone else who hears you and is present and holds it can be healing and wonderful, but it's part of the reason why I cry almost every session, because it's so overwhelming to share it that way,
Yeah.
So yeah, just as healing it is. So don't think that it doesn't feel overwhelming and it'll be easy peasy lemon squeezy. It'll be tricky, but very, very helpful. And in the end, super healing.
I agree.
Okay, let's move on to question number 6.
Okay.
And that asks, why are a lot of therapists unwilling to work with autistic clients, even if they're not coming to therapy for their autism? And someone left a comment question below this, said, follow-up question, if possible, are there common challenges for people with autism when in mental health recovery? Now, my initial knee-jerk reaction was, I don't think all therapists, they're saying a lot. I think a lot of times when it comes to certain specializations, like even eating disorders, I have a lot of other colleagues of mine who are like, oh, I just don't treat them, so I refer them out right away. I've told you guys over the years, I don't treat addiction. I have a couple of patients who've been in recovery, but I don't specialize in that. And I really feel the most benefit for a patient comes with that specialization touch. And I think autism might fall into that too. I think autistic people might be referred because they'd want you to see someone who understands it in and out. What do you think?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Because I think the interventions are very specific to what a person with autism might be struggling with. And that doesn't necessarily fall into like how I might treat depression and anxiety, although somebody with autism might suffer from depression and anxiety. I think the mode of intervention might be different. And so, I think also, just again, talking about scope of practice, most clinicians ethically are bound to practice within an area that they feel proficient in.
Yeah, and we can get in trouble if we go outside of that. And so, and that's a good point. And I think that a lot of times, and I've talked about this in the past, like therapists will do what we call like CYA, where they like cover their ass, or cover your ass is what it stands for, because people can file complaints and there are ethical and legal boundaries that we have to live within when it comes to our work. And so that's part of the reason why I don't treat addiction, is because it is such a specialized thing, and it can come with like detox, and it can be very complicated. And I don't feel like able to do, like, it's out of my scope.
Yeah. It's irresponsible.
Yeah. And it's kind of like we've talked about in the videos we did together on my main channel, is like, you don't want to pull someone into the deep end if you know they can't swim back to the shallow. And I feel like when it comes to working with specific patients, you want to make sure that you know how to gauge that. And with autistic people, I think in many ways, there's simple things that we could do, simple interventions that we could utilize for anxiety or depression or something like that. But by and large, I do find it to be the most helpful to see someone who, again, knows the ins and outs, understands the difficulties, because things can be different.
Right. Different ways to process information or process emotional information or behavioral interventions that even if as a trained clinician, I could do reading and training, I don't think it takes the place of that specialty.
I don't think so either. And I could even think of things that might be misunderstood. Like stemming is a huge thing in the autistic community. So if you guys don't know what stemming is, it could be like something that I would do. Like I could be rocking, I could be moving my hands. It's something I do to calm myself down. Essentially, it's a behavior. And I know I did a video a few weeks ago or a month ago where I talked about like misunderstandings with autism. And one of those is like the ABA therapy. People find it very harmful. I talked about why that is, but that's the only thing that we're actually taught in school and in training. but they would have them like sit on their hands if they were to fidget, and people find that very hurtful. But a therapist who's not trained might look at a stemming behavior and might think, oh, they're anxious. Do you know what I mean? We might misinterpret what's going on because we don't really know. And again, I feel like in therapy is the one place, hopefully there's more than the one place, but at least that one place where we can feel heard and understood. And I think I would personally be worried that I would misunderstand or do more harm than I intend, you know?
I think also, given that autism, right, is on a spectrum, there might be things, if we're just expanding for a second, like grief, that's pretty universal. Or if it's like, if the person wasn't coming in specifically for challenges around the autism, but I guess it is pretty pervasive, I would imagine, the challenges. So there might be a few cases in which it might be appropriate.
Yeah, and I could see that too. Like I said, very specific interventions.
Yeah.
But again, I think that's probably what you're coming into, just to like have a conversation about it, because I even know for my patients with BPD, they, you know, people will refer them out right away, there's a lot of different things, trauma.
Yeah. But if I think about it, like if you're going to, you know, if you have a throat condition, you're going to an ear, nose, and throat doctor. You really want to see that specialist. You don't want to see a generalist. And, you know, if I think about optimal care and you getting to the goals of your treatment, I think with respect to a lot of mental health diagnoses, I think it's really wise to go to somebody who's seen it, done it, has that training. Yeah,
because they'll be able to draw your attention to things that another practitioner might overlook. Yeah, agreed. Okay, we have 2 more questions. Okay. Question number 7. It says, hi, Kati. How does one handle being triggered by their own therapist? I have PTSD and have been very open with my therapist about the trauma that occurred last year and my struggles with it. As a whole, I absolutely love working with her and have felt very safe in discussing my experiences with her. However, at the end of my last session, we were doing some good-natured bantering back and forth, probably just to wind down the session. And as we were winding down, I forgot exactly what I'd said to her, but she made finger guns and pretended to fire them. And I know this was completely unintentional, but it sent me reeling into my PTSD brain, which included images of suicidal ideation. And as she knows that guns are a trigger for me, it happened so fast that my brain didn't have the chance to process it. And I found myself almost yelling at her, don't do that to me. Don't do that to me. I was immediately in hardcore tears, feeling betrayed, which I don't think I felt before. Lots of anger at her, along with suicidal ideations in my head that I did not want. She did immediately recognize that she did something very wrong and apologized, told me that that she will do what she can to not let this happen again, include looking into her professional development opportunities around this subject, and let me be very angry at her, which is good. However, now I feel like a bit of a wall is up to protect myself from being further hurt. And yet I know I don't want her to feel like she has to keep her guard up with me because of this situation. And what other words of wisdom do you have about healing from this? I'll let you take this one first.
So it's so interesting when you first started the question and you said you got triggered by the therapist. I did a dance, which I was like, oh God, I literally was like that idea of like, first I would normalize it. That the therapist, she had a thoughtless moment with the gesturing, but I'd say this is typical and comes in the territory of trauma, that it's, I don't want to say it's more grist for the mill because it does impact the relationship and there is a repair but what I will say is I have yet to do deep trauma work with people and there wasn't something in the room that happened. Maybe it wasn't by me, but in the room that has happened and has been a part of our trauma work. The reason why I think it's extra special in a hard way is the beauty of working through the repair with somebody. And she seems like a skilled therapist, is going to do some additional professional development, can be the most profound experience a person has, which is therapist took responsibility for it. She's going to do her own work, clean up her side of the street. She's going to come back and maybe make that adjustment and tune in a different way. She might be misattuned another time and make another error. That's a possibility. But her cleanup and her skills in cleaning up, which therapists train a lot in how to do skillfully, that sometimes actually I can do a huge long course of treatment with somebody, and that will be the thing they remember.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Course.
The repair.
Yeah. But I do think, and to your point, that repair work is super healing and something that we're going to have to do in life. So it's a great place to practice, because like I've talked about over and over again, you know, and I'm not saying that your therapist wasn't wrong here, because she was, but as a person who has triggers, and we can all be triggered, I'm responsible for my own triggers and learning how to manage them. Obviously, you were in therapy, which is that safe space where you kind of let your guard down more and you allow more of that interaction, maybe to be more vulnerable than you would be out into the world. And so that was why it was such a deeper wound. But again, being able to recognize the hurt, recognize that this wall went up, communicating about that. I feel like I put this wall up to protect myself, and I understand, you know, you're doing your best. I don't want you to apologize for putting this wall up, by the way. It's part of just this natural response or reaction from a wound. And then the cool thing about therapy is that we get to actually work through the repair, and we don't just avoid, which tends to be what those of us with PTSD do, is we just avoid. We avoid any situation, like I've talked about before, we avoid any situation that's triggering, and our world slowly gets smaller until we do the work to push it back out. And so I really want you to stick with this. I really want you to express that this wall went up. You don't have to know why. You don't have to give it a bunch of descriptive terms. It's more just like, I just don't feel as open, or however it feels to you, you know, letting her know. If you feel like she did a good job with it, you can say, I really appreciate the stuff you've done, you know. You don't have to, but I think just acknowledgement of that pain and that hurt and the ripple effects it's caused is really key. And then how do we move forward?
Yeah. I think that how do we move forward? What do you need to feel safe with her again?
Yeah.
Do you need do you need different kinds of boundaries, or cue signals or hand signals when, you know, you feel like you were triggered? Like, what are, you know, for her to stop? I think there's a lot of opportunity and work you can do to create more safety with her. The inclination or impulse might be like, okay, it's not going to work, I'm going to cut off.
Yeah.
You know, because that avoidance that Katie was talking about. And I think actually, if there's enough evidence that you've done quite a bit of good work together, this is actually one of those opportunities to lean in and discover what you need now. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it might be a good learning for both of you, because I think a lot of times we don't know what we need. And so having that conversation and being curious before the conversation with maybe thinking about what we need. It might be some time. It might be some tricky conversations about what came up and why, and, you know, all of that. And I told you, and I feel betrayed. And that's an interesting emotion for me, because I haven't felt it before, or that I recall, right? So that was new to you. Digging into that a little bit, I think will be really healing, and talking it through. And as someone who doesn't like to be angry, it's really healing to actually be angry.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. Yeah.
To be angry with someone and know that that doesn't mean the relationship is over. It just means I was angry with you because you did something that was hurtful. And then on the flip side, so then as moving forward in the healing process, my hypothesis would be that part of like your side of the street is going to be not allowing yourself to continually relive that over and over and wound yourself with it over and over again. Because we can do that in our head sometimes when something painful happens, or we can even do it with things that we've done that we wish we didn't do, right? We replay it over and over and like wound ourselves. And this was such a wounding moment. I would encourage you, instead of replaying it back over and over, to tap into instead how you felt and what feelings came after and what's happening now in the way that you feel. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it almost keeps the work moving instead of just be stuck in the trigger.
Yeah.
What happened next? And you get to really explore that, and that maybe you've never done that before.
I know, it's like building a whole new map, right?
It is.
On uncharted territory.
It is. I think it then makes getting triggered less scary when you're like, okay, I'm triggered now. Everything's wrong and bad, and there's this weird thing and I have to avoid it. And it's like, it kind of creates a different map of like, okay, well, we all get triggered, and there's life after that and relationship after that. And you're going to get some tools about how to do that.
Yeah, agreed. And we might be surprised, to be honest, that after doing this work, we might get triggered less. Because sometimes I think it's the fear of the upset that can make the reaction that much more intense. And now that we know I lived through it, nothing bad happened. Well, I felt bad for a period of time, but the relationship wasn't broken. I'm not broken. It was just difficult. You know, sometimes that in and of itself can be, I don't know, it can make it less in the future.
Okay, so there's this one other thing that I have to now say, because it didn't come at first for me, is often when I'm working with somebody in a traumatic event, I can, without awareness, become the perpetrator in the room because I'm sitting too close, or I all of a sudden represent the threat, and that's not uncommon. So I just want to say, I think probably an unconscious move she made, but that she became maybe the perpetrator, the aggressor, and you get to say, no, I don't like it. Maybe that was also something that you didn't get to do, and you didn't get to fight back and be mad. Because when you said the mad, I always it's like, that's good. Mad's good. So
it's protective. You get to come in and save the day a little bit.
Yeah. Who did you not get to say that to? So it's health. I just want to remind you, it's your health of your system. That is very healthy response. And lean in on the fact that your therapist has that health too, to receive what you have that feels unfinished here.
Yeah. Agreed. I love that. Okay, final question. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Okay. It says, is it possible to feel triggered from a past sexual assault after having a baby? I was sexually assaulted when I was 20 in my home. I wasn't ready for therapy after the assault, so I stopped showing up, and I couldn't find it in me to open up to my partner at the time about the pain that I was feeling. Everyone always showed sympathy for her as if she was the one who went through the trauma. Ugh. It caused me to pretend I was okay, and I never talked about it again. I recently moved to Washington State, Pacific Northwesterner, and I had a baby in February. I have developed postpartum depression, but I feel as if my postpartum depression is stemming from my trauma. I'm seeing a therapist, but I've had so much trauma in many different forms that I can't seem to focus on what thing to talk about, and our sessions are all over the place. I'm very comfortable with her and ready to deal with my past trauma, but I also have a tendency to attach myself to older women as a result of having an unavailable and unemotional mom. She mentioned last week that she's leaving the office that she's at to do inpatient or something like that and can't take me with her. That happens. I nodded as if it's fine with me, but now I'm scared I won't find someone that I'm comfortable with to open up to again. Is it okay to be picky with the therapist I see? Of course it is. Should I tell my therapist about not knowing how to handle the fact that she's leaving? Yes. How can I focus on topics I want to tackle if there's so much I want to get off of my chest? So there's a lot in this question.
Yeah.
So first, is it possible to feel triggered from a past sexual assault after having a baby? Do you think her postpartum could be due to that?
I think it might be too reductionistic to say yes and only that, but I do think it's pretty common during delivery for that to come up, and there's a lot of overwhelming physical sensations during labor and during pregnancy, absolutely, that can stir up lots of physical memories and sensations.
Yeah, 100%. And I think also we do know through research that people who have had depression or anxiety or something in their past, like other mental health struggles, are more apt to have postpartum depression. I think it's like, is it 28% more likely or something like that?
Sounds about right.
I'm pulling it out of I haven't read that article in a long time.
Yeah.
But I think that could be, because like I've talked about before, we can have a propensity for something, or we could have PTSD, but sometimes in order to have symptoms come up, we need a precipitating event, and having a baby could have been that precipitating event.
1000%.
So there's that component. And then to get into the questions toward the end, is it okay to be picky with the therapist that I see?
It's like my favorite question. Yes. I mean,
100%.
I think I've said it probably every time we've ever talked in any video, that the number one variable that's predictive of a positive outcome of therapy is the relationship between the patient and therapist. Modality, therapeutic style or orientation aside. So yes, it's like, dating.
It's really important. Yeah. And if you don't like someone, if you don't connect, if something, although again, if it's like going back to the previous question or like the question before, if a therapist does something that is upsetting, it is important to attempt to work through it as best as you can. If they're willing to clean their side of the street, there's nothing worse than a therapist that can't admit that they've done something wrong and invalidates and almost harms again. But it is important for us to at least communicate, stand up for ourselves, advocate for ourselves. But aside from that, like we should try to work through those things. But if we just don't get a good vibe, like I saw this guy for a while, it never worked. I saw him like 3-4 sessions and was like, no. First of all, he was like around my age. Too close. Second of all, he's a dude. I prefer females. No judgments. Third, he just, I maybe it was my own thing, but I felt like I wanted him to be more directive and that just wasn't maybe his style. So I stopped seeing him and saw somebody else end up being perfect. Fine. Wonderful. So yes, be very picky. It's very important. Like to Alexa's point, all the research shows success in therapy stems from that relationship.
What I usually tell people after the first session, like, do you feel hope? Do you feel understood? Do you feel like, even if you don't feel safe there yet, could you imagine getting there with that person? And if you don't, I feel like there's a certain, it's more than just even chemistry, but a sense of like kind of confidence with them in their presence that, not because they say all the right things, but that you feel there's a certain kind of sense of feeling like they can hold what I have to say and I don't have to take care of them.
Yeah.
Or,
it's like they have a large enough container for me to put all my shit in it.
Yeah. And you might not even have the words for that, but it is a feeling and take your time.
Yeah.
And you can even have like a first, second, like Katie said, third, fourth session with somebody. I still think of all of that as an assessment.
Agreed. Because you're still just getting to know each other. It's only 50 minutes. You know what I mean? And unless you're doing 90-minute sessions, it's 50 minutes. And it takes a few hours to get to know someone.
It does.
And then, second question. Should I tell my therapist about not knowing how to handle the fact she's leaving me? 100%. Please, please do. Attachment is so common in therapy. Usually if we've had any traumas, we haven't had anybody in our life that's actually shown compassion and nurturing and understanding for us. We've never felt that kind of support. So of course we find a person who does, and we're like, don't ever leave me, pretty please. This is wonderful. And we can become, because they're helping us work through it, it can be really difficult for us to not do that. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's something that we should identify and we should talk about because, again, there are healthy boundaries within therapy. But please tell her. I think it's also, aside from the attachment, everybody gets annoyed and upset when their therapist is leaving.
Yeah.
And it does suck. We often have those written into the contracts that we can't take people with us.
So one of the things that comes up for me when you say that, though, is I was like, oh, okay. So by sharing that, maybe also gets you into the territory of like more tender feelings because there's been an attachment. And it's one thing to be super pissed at your therapist leaving, appropriate, fair, that might be there. But maybe by sharing that you're really messed up, you're sharing how much you felt cared for, or you cared about her or the relationship or the work. And that is beautiful as that material is. For a lot of people, it's really hard to talk about. You were meaningful, or did I matter? Or all of that stuff that, we want to talk about, but we don't want to talk about because those are feelings maybe that were never regarded as safe or okay
to feel.
So it's, I mean, if you've sat with me now at almost an hour, my feeling is like lean into that because even though she's leaving, I think it's an opportunity at learning something about those feelings and that experience and having somebody receive that.
I agree. Yeah. And it's kind of, I think for those of us who don't feel safe or okay feeling certain things, like I don't feel okay feeling anger. It's really difficult. It's actually very healing for me to have someone who can weather that and like not cultivate it, because I don't want it to be created, but almost like it's like I've planted the seeds of anger and they're allowing them to grow a little to show me that they're not so dangerous after all. Like I think they're going to be this huge poisonous tree and they turn out to be like clovers.
Right. Well,
You
right,
know?
right. Like there's an emotional capacity where anger, let's say, is not off-putting. It's like actually appreciated for what it really is, or tender feelings are very much appreciated for what they are. And, it's like wanting that therapist who's kind of can be kind of unweathered. Mm-hmm. Is that the right word? Unweathered?
It's kind of like undeterred.
Deterred.
Yeah, maybe like
Deterred.
not pushed off from a course.
It's not, yes.
Yeah, they don't like
Undeterred.
avoid.
Right.
They go right in.
Yes.
Yeah, having like a therapist that's courageous enough to like step into it with you.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, and then the last question. How can I focus on topics that I want to tackle if there's so much to get off of my chest? I think, again, this is kind of like at the root of what we've been talking about together today is like, sometimes it's this topic of her leaving and you processing and giving space and holding all that comes up for you. It might be anger as well as those tender emotions, and those are all welcome and all okay. That is the work. And I think so often we look at this one goal of like, oh, I need to work through these traumas, and I've had these traumas in my life and I need to process those. But we'll get there. In that process is part of this like attachment and identifying those emotions and it's all in there. I feel like she's already getting things off her chest by even acknowledging that she's upset. What do you think?
Yes. I mean, I hear that the biggest thing is that this relationship is ending, and that it took a long time maybe to build that trust and to start over is overwhelming. And maybe part of what your question is for the next therapy, is there a way I can organize and focus the work? So that, I don't know if that's what you're asking too, but I'm with Katie. I think at this point that it's winding down, this is the biggest thing in the room. That would be what I would focus on. Mm-hmm. If I was like hierarchically itemizing your list. Yeah. The other thing I might do for the next therapy, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the work, I might do a timeline. I think sometimes it's really helpful with a therapist. Mm-hmm. Just like the big events, positive big events, negative big events, meaning that you made, belief systems that were informed, really go through the thorough history and maybe find out which therapist does that. I think sometimes that can get missed, and it can be a way to organize the work for you, where you feel like I have a bigger idea of why I'm feeling even if I don't know how to get into all those experiences, but
yeah, I can at least identify
an outline might be helpful.
I think timelines are great.
Yeah.
Because I don't think a lot of therapists take thorough histories a lot. And I feel like I do it mostly, but I'm sure there's a patient or two where it was like they were in crisis. We were just dealing with something and I maybe never got back around to it. And I think that is really helpful. And it could also, in some ways, make things feel a little bit more manageable because we can see it. It doesn't feel so, I don't know, not like esoteric, but kind of like I can't make sense of it. It's so scattered. This can kind of, contain it.
The other thing is dealing with postpartum depression. You might be in survival.
Yes.
So if you're in survival, I think therapy sometimes can be more tactical. Like we're just working on getting you support or sleeping or nourished, and all of that timeline stuff. It might not be the right time.
Yeah.
It might just be, how do we get you through the next week? And let's worry about these other things when you're functioning a little bit better. So that also might be something to think about, like, okay, what are my immediate needs? Yeah. And this might not feel as rewarding as getting into the past stuff, but necessary, because you can't do that past stuff unless you're in a stable place.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sending in your questions. Thank you for sitting with us and answering them.
So great.
Isn't
great
it fun?
Questions.
Podcasting's fun.
Yes, I know. Well, it's fun with you.
And thank you for being the last person that I film in this apartment with. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's exciting.
It is exciting.
It's both.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Please leave reviews. Please share this with friends. I'll see you guys next week. Bye. Sean, we're done.
Wow. Did an hour really go by?
I think it's even been over.
Oh, wait, can I just say? I wouldn't want to do that by myself, but with you it was really fun.
It's fun to bounce it back and forth,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. Sean?